it's been interesting. I've gone pretty deep on looking into how the process of scouting has evolved over time in baseball. And it is very interesting seeing how quickly it changed from what it was, reading some of the more famous scouting reports from the 1950s to what we have today is just, it's kind of wild because when, one of the things that you'd always heard of is you have 5 tool players. I didn't realize that was basically because that was literally just the 5 things they scouted players on.
And what are those 5 things?
Fielding, speed, power, contact, and then what was the last one? Arm,
right.
And so that was it. That was and it wasn't any kind of metric grade. It was just good, very good, outstanding, not great. Like there was
that's way back when,
right? Yeah. Way back. I'm talking back in the 50s. That's all there was. It was a very, very inexact science.
Here's the scouting report for Sandy Koufax in 1954. Very good prospect, also very good hitter. Has averaged 16 strikeouts per game this season. Aptitude, very good. I don't know how they know that. Outstanding aggressiveness, definite prospect, tall, muscular, quick reflexes, well-coordinated, going to the University of Cincinnati on a scholarship. Not interested in pro ball until he graduates. Also plays first because of hitting ability. That's the scouting report on Sandy Koufax.
Really tells you a lot about him as a player.
I don't know. So I guess he pitches because he averages 16 strikeouts a season, but do we even know he's left-handed? No.
It tells you nothing about the type of pitcher he is. It tells you nothing about how he pitches. It doesn't tell you about who he is as a person outside of some basic details.
Oh, he's going to the University of Cincinnati, so he must be a smart one.
Right, that's all you. But he's on a scholarship, so you don't know for sure. You don't know what his grades are. You don't know how tall he is. You don't know how big he is.
How about Bob Gibson from 1956?
Mm-hmm.
This boy attends Creighton. He has not had much pitching experience, but has nice loose arm and can throw hard. Will be a junior at Creighton this fall.
Really, really exact science there. So I think it's so interesting when you look at these old ones, how little information that they had. I mean, really, realistically, what were they evaluating when they were looking at these guys?
How do these guys ever make it to the So Billy Williams is in the Hall of Fame. We talked about him. So this boy has a very fast swing, may develop into a good hitter. Left-handed pitchers give him trouble at this stage. Arm may be questionable. Does that sound like a Hall of Famer to you?
No.
So I don't think they really knew.
No, I don't think they had any idea. And I don't think they knew what they were looking for either. It was just sort of a feel-based thing that you looked at some guys like Sandy Koufax or Hank Aaron and go, okay, that guy, there's just something that seems special about them. And that's why there could be some guys that they just completely whiff on because they didn't have whatever characteristics the scouts valued, but they were just good ball players.
There's lots of guys.
Right, there's lots of guys like that.
With fun. And you think about the movies. I think you started by saying movies. And it's like, what is it about the fascination, right? There's baseball movies, but there's lots of movies about baseball scouting. Mm-hmm. So we just watched recently the end of Trouble with the Curve. So that's a more modern day.
Right.
Except that you're basically trying to show the dinosaur, Clint Eastwood's character, the scout, is
still
not such
has
a dinosaur. Exactly. So
he still gets what's going on. He's not totally lost it.
And then you've got $1 Million Arm more recently, right, with John Hamm, and that's a scout movie to get these guys into the major leagues. You go back a little further, you get Moneyball. I mean, that's a scouting movie, isn't it?
But that's sort of what we're talking about with the evolution of scouting and metrics and what we saw. Because as you went from the 50s, where there was very little information given by the scouts, even by the 60s, we were already starting to see an evolution in terms of what people were putting out there. I think by the 70s, they were starting to have information about the player in terms of his height and his weight. They were starting to have information about who they were as people because they started realizing, wait a second, who this young man that we're bringing into our organization is almost as important as the talent that the kid has.
And last week we talked about the effect of the draft, on Major League Baseball, and it's the same thing here when it comes to scouting, because before the draft, basically it was a free for all. right? So you'd have your scouts. You'd try to, hide a player. You try to find a player and not let anybody else know about them. You're paying people off, and that, while it still happens today, once you had a draft system, all of a sudden you could only hide them for so long,
right?
And so your scouting changed a lot once
and
there was a draft,
and your value of hitting on those players became more important because you couldn't sort of just like stumble across the guy, like you said, and stash him. You had to make sure whichever guys you were picking in the draft did well, so you needed your scouts to be able to hit much earlier in their career. And so I think the draft certainly hastened on the development of it. But then it was just also the complete lack of good information I think a lot of the teams were getting from their scouts.
Well, the teams that had sort of scouting already in their organizations and had histories like the Yankees, the Dodgers, and the Cardinals, those teams really fought hard against the draft for obvious reasons because they kind of had it, going their way at that point, and all of a sudden the playing field was going to be level because the worst team, the NFL had done this before, so the baseball kind of followed suit by saying, oh yeah, we're going to give the worst teams the best draft. Now baseball is a lot different than football that way, as it turns out, but still you had, we can talk about the number one baseball draft picks in history that
that was one of the big things that came out of the evolution in scouting is that you saw by the 70s, like on Frank Thomas's scouting report, they had his probability of signing. So they were already starting to evaluate these players on what type of player they were going to be. They weren't just being like, oh yeah, he's got a good live fastball. They were looking at like, okay, what are we projecting this player, not only as he is right now, well, what type of player is he likely to be when we're scouting him? Because when we're looking at these scouting reports, we want to know if we're taking what we think Derek Jeter was or what we think Alex Rodriguez actually was when we were looking at them as prospects. Not, oh yeah, well, he's got a good bat and a good arm. Like, you need more info than that. You need more ways of grading these players.
And they handled it so bad before that, when you say in the 50s, because the whole bonus babies thing that we've talked about, you then had to, whatever you signed the player for, anybody who got paid more than $4,000 was a bonus baby, and then they had to be on the roster of the team for 2 years. And so the team knew the player wasn't ready to go and play baseball. They had to sit his butt on the bench and let him watch for 2 years so they wouldn't lose him, and they weren't breaking the rule, by not having him on the roster, even though the other players didn't want him there. So that was a dumb thing that they did that lasted far too long. That really affected baseball.
And now the name of the game was completely different. You don't have scouts sort of just going around listening and hearing rumors and reading local newspaper reports to see if there's some kid somewhere out in the boondocks that's got a big arm that, oh, wow, I think I might have found the next one. Now these kids are all part of talent mills and agencies where they're moving out to scouting complexes where they're all getting out in front of, big events designed for the scouts to be able to just sit there and have information fed to them. And with all the science and the metrics, they're probably just waiting until their computer flags some kid that hits the right stuff for them. Now all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, wait a second, we might have somebody here. And they're probably not interested in looking until they get that.
And they get that a lot. You getting kinds of data from high school pitchers now, and below you're getting video data, you're getting ergonomic data on how the body's working, what kind of stress the kid's arm might have had to this point. I mean, it's the data difference compared to another baseball scouting movie that was one of my favorites called The Scout with Albert Brooks. So his role in the world was to find when he calls up the Yankees, because I think that's what he was scouting for. He was about to lose his job, and so he found Kong.
Right.
He found Brendan Fraser, who was the guy who could hit, prodigious home runs, and he would strike out, 19 guys every time he pitched in this strange league in Mexico. And he felt like he found the holy grail, right?
Right. Somehow there was this guy out there that nobody knew about, and of course, it was.
And that's every scout's dream.
And of course, in the context of the movie, is a random white guy playing in a Mexican league.
Oh, that is a fantastic movie.
It's a great movie. I love the movie.
That's right up there with my favorite baseball movie. It's kind of fake and real all at the same time.
Oh yeah, I think it speaks to just sort of the romantic nature of what we hope scouts are, as opposed to what they actually are. Because there's something that's so fantastic about the idea that we could all see it. I mean, how many? The reason why I know I can't be a scout is Preston Wilson. because I thought he was going to be amazing when he came up with the
Mookie's boy, right?
I thought he was going to be the best young player ever. I was so ready to spend my whole career cheering for him. He was not any of that. But if you asked young me how good he was, I would have told you that guy was going to be the next Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa. Like, that's how much I thought of him.
They didn't give. I don't remember them giving him the kiss of death they gave Alex Escobar when he came up to the Mets before your time. Alex Escobar was a 5-tool player. The problem was none of those were baseball tools.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and I think that's a big part of that, is that as fans, it's so easy for us to think we know what, we would be, great scouts. No, we'd be terrible scouts. And I can tell you that because, look at how many guys I thought were going to be the one that comes up. I've been telling you Brett Beatty was going to be the next third baseman, I think, for about 3 seasons now, and he's yet to turn that corner.
When they got to the 70s, right, they got a little bit more sophisticated because they went beyond the 5-tool thing. They still use that.
Right.
But they went to the 20 to 80 scale for how you evaluate the player.
Right. And they started, and this is when they also started splitting it out between what they were right now and what they had potential to grow into, because they were also recognizing that, hey, we're looking at these kids when they're just coming out of high school. It's not entirely fair to, rate some kid as a 60 power tool when he's 17, when he's going to still grow and potentially grow into his body and develop more of a power tool over time.
But they basically, I don't know if I guess they 20-80 these kids even going to high school at this point. And so 20 is as bad as it gets for a big leaguer, right? Think Billy Hamilton's power. I love these little...
Right. A great way to understand it.
30, poor but not unplayable, such as Edwin Encarnacion's speed.
Right.
Not a very fast player. Okay. 40, below average, such as Eloy Jimenez's defense or Trevor Bauer's control. That's it. So you're taking really good players and finding their fatal flaws.
Right. You would be like, I would love Eloy if he could play the field, but he's just so bad on defense. Yeah.
So 45. So now we go up by 5. 45 is fringe average major leaguer. Ronaldo Lopez's control and Kurt Suzuki's arm quality. Okay.
Good enough, but probably you wish it was a little better.
50 is a major league average. Juan Soto's speed. I just love this. So okay. I've had something to pick on Juan Soto. Yeah, he's not the fastest guy out there. So,
he's like slow.
Right. 55, above average, Nick Castellanos' power. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, right. That's his asset right there, right? That is.
But that's what you have to think. Nick Castellanos has above average major league power, and that sets him apart. But that's what 55 is. So think about that when guys get rated and you hear about their tools. If 55 is Nick Castellanos, that's pretty good.
Right. And so it gets better as we go up the scale. So 60 is a plus player. Alex Bregman's speed, which is interesting because I wouldn't have considered that to be his primary asset. But now we're saying not only is he a good player, he's got enough speed to be an upper echelon player. Well, Steven Strasburg's control, which was great, obviously. So that's a good way. 70 is plus among the best tools in the game, such as Corey Seager's arm. Well, we saw that this year in the World Series as well. Patrick Corbin's slider. That's his only pitch.
But it's a really
good pitch. Francisco Lindor's defense. I just love that they put Lindor's defense.
You're right. And that would be a 70-plus defense. The guy's a gold glove defender, really, really good.
And besides being a 30-30 guy this year. So, and then 80, top of the scale, right? Some scouts consider only one player tool in all the major leagues to be 80. Okay? So think of Aaron Judge's power, Byron Buxton's speed, or Aroldis Chapman's fastball. Now, what that doesn't mean, like in the case of Aaron Judge, he has a lot of other things in his game that make him great.
Right, but
that one aspect of his game is so good.
Right, you're saying to have an 80 tool, what you're basically saying is I'm forecasting this guy to be the best in the major league at this. If I'm saying he's got 80 grade speed, he is going to be the fastest guy in the major leagues. That's the kind of praise you hear.
That's the level that we're using.
So if you're most guys, if you're hearing 75, that means they're being forecasted as upper echelon, top 5 in that position and that tool.
So it's obviously a lot more sophisticated than saying he's a 5-tool player. And you can go find all this stuff in Baseball America and just put in 2080. It's fun to read it all.
It is interesting kind of seeing the drop off, and that now after 2000, there's not as many scouting reports for these guys available online. Teams hang on to them a lot more because they don't want to reveal their methodology. Because you can go back and you can read the Jeter scouting report from the Reds or A-Rod's scouting report where they describe describe him as bullheaded. That was
They ended up being right about that.
a absolutely fantastic description of A-Rod, right? And they forecasted him as a guy that would hit about 275 with 20 homer and 20 steal power. And early in his career, that's about a dead on for what A-Rod was. That's a really, and they were like, just dead on for what they were scouting with. So you can see how much better they've got at forecasting these players and who they were and what they were going to be. Generally they're pretty good, and you don't see guys totally defy expectations and become unbelievable players out of nowhere nearly as much anymore.
Well, and that's because of the draft. Obviously, one of the reasons why. And then in addition, I think about the way that it used to be in terms of scouting. You only really had to scout in the U.S. Right. You only had to scout white players for the longest time, until 1947 at least. And now you've got the KBR, you've got the NPB,
and scouting with
all over the world.
And scouting with those leagues is an entirely different process because you have video of everything. The scouting is totally different because you have metrics and video for every player coming out of those leagues. The work's already done. Your scouting is analyzing that information and trying to determine, okay, if we bring him over to the major leagues, how good is he actually going to be?
Not like Amy Adams at the end of Trouble with the Curve when she goes to her dad and she goes, I heard it.
Right.
Like I heard it. It made the sound like the sound you were always talking about. They had the magic. This is the guy. That was their Kong. They found it because she heard it.
She heard the right sound. No,
I don't think that's a good enough
heard
evaluation.
The sound with Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
It's romantic.
Right,
it's a movie.
Wait a second. He has a 95-mile-an-hour fastball, and he's got this kind of slider. Okay, wait a second. We think he's going to be this effective. I think they described him as having like a Blake Snell fastball with a Gaussman curveball or something spooky like
Sandy Koufax. I thought he was Sandy Koufax.
Right. Like basically, like there's a reason there's a reason why he got $300 million without ever having thrown a pitcher in the major leagues. This guy is supposed to be that good.
So I think in that sense, you have much better evaluation than the hunches, obviously, and the feelings. But there's still, I think, the scouts' real contribution is understanding the makeup of the player, because we sure know guys have every aspect of the plus stuff.
And that's so much more of what scouts are responsible for, is digging into who this kid is and trying to understand him, because that's where you're going to see there's a whole lot of kids that can hit 300. There's not a lot of kids that can handle being a major league player and the work that you have to put into that, and what happens when you're not being successful. And that's what I think the scouts are so much more responsible for, because you can have a kid that can look amazing on a tryout and scouting and swinging at batting practice, and then ask him to put it together on the road in the minor leagues, and it's a totally different ball game for him.
And I think we always say, or I like to say, that the greatest players seem to be the hardest workers, right? In baseball. But I don't know that you can sort of figure that out when you're looking at a 17-year-old and you see Max Scherzer at 17 or Justin Verlander, just to pick two guys.
Right.
We all know what their work ethic ended up being and how hard and what the effort they put into what they do. Not that other people don't. But how could you have been able to understand the level of makeup that they had that would allow them to continue to improve, to understand what they needed to do to continue to get better? That's a really hard call to make. And I don't know. It's at 17, the 17-year-old doesn't know.
No.
Maybe he's undetermined.
But as a scout, you've seen, the idea is that you've hopefully seen enough of kids like that you know the ones that are more likely to stick with it than the ones that aren't.
Right, that's the kind of makeup you're looking for, and they've somehow displayed they've been able to overcome adversity.
Right.
It might not be on the field adversity, it might be other kinds of adversity.
Because ultimately, if you're the organization, you're probably going to judge scouts more on their prospects flaming out because they couldn't handle it emotionally than not having the talent.
Yeah, you've got they wouldn't be even talked about if they didn't have the talent.
Some guys are just not going to have, they're just not going to have the success, and that's okay. So if they don't have the success, they don't have the success. But the guys that flame out and can't handle the lifestyle, I think that's probably infinitely more frustrating on the organization's part, because that's a guy they can do nothing with.
Right, and that's sometimes you can make a huge investment in a guy and not realize.
Right.
And I think those mistakes were made more before they started realizing that there's
Who
a lot of things that go into making
Right.
up a
Who
pro
this
ball
player is very important, maybe more important than the talent he has.
And I think teams were also worse, obviously,
Oh,
have gotten
yeah.
better at managing, the young phenom. I mentioned the David Clyde story, the guy who was on the cover of Sports Illustrated 50 years ago, and how, he wasn't ready to be in the big leagues, but because they paid him a lot of money, they brought him right up, and they used him weird, and he flamed out, and some of that is on the club.
Right, on the
maybe a lot of
scouting
it.
report, pushing him forward, saying he's ready.
Yeah, and when I guess throwing a 95-mile-an-hour pitch makes you think that somebody's ready because it's going as fast as anybody you're facing in the
he's
major
throwing
leagues.
a major league quality fastball. Clearly, he can pitch in major league games, and now we obviously know scouting's a little bit more refined than that sort of thought process.
And they can go into looking at scouting now. Obviously, they've done this for a while, but to even determine the likelihood, we saw that happen with Kumar Rocker a couple years with the Mets, and I don't think he's pitched in a major league game. Certainly, I think he's still pitching in the minor leagues, but the Mets chose him in the amateur draft, and then they looked at his motion, they looked at his medicals, and they said, you know what, this guy's we're not going to do it, and they backed off him, and he was shocked, and the baseball world was kind of shocked, because they walked away from one of their own draft picks and said, no, we're not going to sign this guy to whatever the millions of dollars because we think he's more likely to get injured than anything else.
Right. And now we're forecasting that, and just as we kind of talked about earlier in the episode, these were Willie McCovey. This was from Willie McCovey's scouting report. These were his strengths and weaknesses. Strengths: youth, height.
Yeah, he was 6'4".
Good power.
Good power?
Weaknesses: weak on curve. Good pitching.
What does that mean?
That was his weakness as a player, was good pitching.
I don't understand. And good power. I saw him hit the speaker at Shea Stadium. It's
Right.
one of the longest balls I've ever seen him.
Quickly this world evolved and where we've come with scouting in baseball, because it started off at such a lackluster place. They just didn't know what they were doing. And we're still learning as we've come up with more and more statistics, more and more ways of evaluating players. The scouting is what benefits the most, because metrics and stuff like that, they could tell you things about the players that your eyes could never tell you.
I just got to read a few more of these because they are great. So Tom Seaver. Okay, well, here we go. Okay, well built with good with good actions. This boy showed a real good fastball with good life. You can almost hear the drawl.
Right.
And the guys, this boy showed it.
Right, it's like you're hearing somebody talk to you with a jaw full of chaw.
Foghorn Leghorn doing a
Right.
scouting report, right? Has real good command of point of release. Boy has a slider type of curve, but could improve. He has good action on his arm and should be able to come up with a good curve. Boy has plenty of desire to pitch and wants to beat you. That's the time. You know what?
But that's pretty good.
right?
You could see when he was getting scouted, he was you could starting to see the evolution of it there, where they're starting to evaluate who he was as a competitor too.
So 1968 spring training, Reds manager Dave Bristol on Johnny Bench. Give him a couple of years and he'll be the best around. Does everything we ask of a catcher. He had already won the Rookie of the year before. Outstanding arm and catches ball good. Tough kid who can catch every day. Has good quick stroke with the bat. Some power. Tends to get on his pitchers a little too much, but this is only a minor flaw. One of the best to come along in a long time. That's an excellent score. Considering he doesn't have any of the tools that we're talking about that people have.
Right.
There was no video.
But he could just tell. Now, granted, he had a year of watching him in the majors where he won Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, right. That's him saying, but he was just talking about the player after a year. It's not So here's a scout from Mike Schmidt. Saw this boy play. We getting a theme here? Saw this boy play in the Central Illinois Collegiate League. Okay, I don't know about how big a league that might be. Well-built boy with quite with quite a bit of ability. A steady type player. When you keep looking for him to do more, he could be a little more aggressive all around in the field and at the plate. Throws the ball well when he throws overhand. Has a tendency to drop his arm down to the side and doesn't throw as well from there. Needs to charge ground balls more. This is a detailed
Now
sport.
it's starting to now you're starting to see actual comments on the game and the type of player he is. You could see the evolution, even looking from Seaver to Mike Schmidt.
has been blessed with better than average ability, just must work a little harder, and he could develop into a good player. The more I saw him, the more I liked his chances. This is a Hall of Fame player,
right?
You know, so I'm
I'm
glad you liked his chances.
Again, this is a guy that's probably watching the poor kid on one afternoon and forming his entire opinion of him off of it.
So you can find this stuff on howtheyplayed.com. You want to read scouting reports of some of the Hall of Famers.
I really recommend checking it out. It's super interesting.
They really do make you laugh. So I think scouting is more difficult today, again, like I said, because of the breadth of what the organization has to do to scout all over the darn place, because players can come out of the woodwork from any place, and the way they play, you go to the Caribbean leagues, and you got to
and you have to sign those players quick, because you could sign them way earlier than you can players from America.
And the international, right, because the international players haven't yet gone, that's got to change.
That's got to change.
That's got to change. I think the international players, you have to put them in the draft, because there's too much, stuff going on. Shenanigans going on here that, would stop that from being what it should be. So, there's another scouting movie, and I don't know, in 1991, do you know this movie, The Talent for the Game?
No.
Okay, we're going to have to put that on the list, because
we need to watch it. We watched it Sandlot now. We've finally seen it. We gotta do that.
So if you have any interesting scouting stories that you can tell us,
stories,
experiences,
let us know we
like this stuff.
Yeah, share it with us. We always love hearing about it.